I've seen deals fall apart or come together over very, very, very small things.
We're coming together with all of our knowledge, all of our experience, all of the people that we bring to this table, and we're able to really negotiate on your best behalf.
Real estate agents, welcome back to the RMG Agent Podcast. I'm your host, Reed Moore, and as always, I just want to say thank you so much for coming along for the ride with us. I'm so passionate about leadership. I'm so passionate about my family and other things, but I'm also passionate about real estate agents. That's you. And that's what this podcast is all about to make an impact in your life, to empower you and to encourage you to go farther, to do more, and to build a great life and career out of real estate. To get more from us, I want to make sure that you guys are liking and subscribing and even commenting on the things that really stand out to you. That helps Jake and I with the feedback to know where to point our energy next. You can also go to our website, rmgagentpodcast.com, to connect with us, to read our blog or any of the other things we're doing. And I also want to just remind you, February 13th, which is this next week, we are dropping a webinar called Come With Me If You Want to Live. And Jake and I are going to be laying out a bunch of things that we think are going to help agents survive and thrive in 2024. And just wanted to invite you guys to that. You can go to the website to sign up. And speaking of Jake, speaking of the Terminator, which is where that line comes from, the one, the only Jake Bartlett, my co-host. Welcome, buddy.
Yeah, thanks. I'm thrilled to be here. It's starting to get warmer, which also is exciting for me. I'm ready for summer to get here, maybe some golf season. So we are going to do the third episode of the This Is the Way series. And This one is going to be This Is the Way application approved. But before we jump into that, we need to go back, make sure that you have gone back and listened to the last two episodes, as well as the previous one where we kind of set the stage. So this is actually the fourth of the series, essentially. We're going to talk first about the trusted guide, or the Sherpa.
Yeah, so the way that we're thinking about this is this idea that real estate agents that are going to thrive or continue to thrive, they're going to have to learn how to close for compensation with any client, not just on the listing side anymore. And so in order to close for compensation, the way that we've been thinking about this is you have to be a trusted guide. And a trusted guide is somebody who is going to be able to get paid for what they're doing. So if you think about a Sherpa for somebody climbing Mount Everest, or you think of any guide, we talked about a vacation that I went on where there was a trusted guide and how incredible that was. And I paid for it, and it was absolutely worth it. So a trusted guide comes down to three things that a few episodes ago we laid out this model, which was a triangle, and that is that a trusted guide brings a level of professional knowledge to the table, and we broke that down into the different parts. They bring a high level of access, because one of the very, very underrated things that a trusted guide brings is all of their resources, all of their connections, all of the other experts that then the client has access to. Right. And so we're taking that, and now today we're talking about the third one, which is application. What does it look like to apply this really, really well to the individual client's needs?
Yep. So we're going to jump into talking about application of your knowledge. And one of the things that buyers definitely need from us is our application of negotiations, right?
Yeah.
So most buyers, could fumble their way through a transaction without an agent, most likely. Could they get the best deal? Could they get under contract in tough situations where they're competing? All those things. So application of your negotiations.
Yeah. So when we think about negotiation skills, if you look at it just at kind of a flyby, it's this idea of, can I negotiate monetarily better than the other agent or the other person on the other side? And that is really the kind of the 1.0 of negotiation. And it's very, very true that you will have clients in your real estate career, especially if you operate with higher end, maybe more sophisticated clients that are better technical negotiators than you, right? Or they may even be professional negotiators. The issue is, and where our application of our knowledge and our access really comes to bear, is when we stop and we think about negotiations in a little broader terms. we think about when we walk into a real estate situation, if we have leveled up all of the areas of our professional knowledge, including the knowledge of our particular client or consumer, and we have brought to bear all of the different people that we have access to with all of their knowledge, now when we talk about negotiation, it's not just about the price, but it's about being able to help this person in this particular situation be able to negotiate through the buying and selling process. And sometimes that actually comes down to things that don't have a monetary value. Right?
Yeah. So I would look at it as, playing, negotiating with a full chessboard, playing chess with all the pieces, opposed to if I took away your queen and half your pawns and half the other pieces and then tried to negotiate by yourself, right? We're coming together with all of our knowledge, all of our experience, all of the people that we bring to this table, and we're able to really negotiate on your best behalf.
Yeah, and so if you think about negotiations when it comes to price, you're thinking checkers, right? Which I'm a pretty fantastic checker player. Yeah. But when you start talking about all of the things that you can grow into in your profession, you really do start looking at a chessboard. And I've seen deals fall apart or come together over very, very, very small things, right? Even things like pets, like just the craziest little things. Because if you remember, your client, even if they're highly sophisticated, even if they're an excellent negotiator, they are not a logical being. They are an emotional being who happens to also be logical, right? And so when you do a great job with your consumer knowledge and you really get to understand what they're wanting, but not just them, you start to understand what the other agent is like on the other side. Maybe you've done some research on the other agent and you start to understand, to whatever extent you can, their client. Now you start to figure out what everybody needs. And ultimately, we want win-win negotiations. And the more excellent that I get with applying my knowledge and my access, the more I can take multiple different pieces and create, like, kind of weave a lot of wins in. And we think about that sometimes in team building or in leadership. And we talk about in our company, we talk about not having single points of failure. And so in negotiations, when everything is about the bottom line price, and there are some deals that are like that, most of them are not. When everything's about the bottom line price, you have the single point of failure. So you have a buyer who wants to buy, you have a seller who wants to sell, and there are maybe 10 or 12 different things that are important in the scenario, but everybody fixates on one. And it might not even in this scenario be the most important one. I've just created a single point of failure. If I can understand that I have the ability to help negotiate and bring a meeting of the minds together around 6 or 7 or 8 of those 12 things, now all of a sudden when price becomes a major frictional piece, it's not a single point of failure. Yes, we have to still negotiate through the price, but if everybody is moving out and has storage and their animals are being taken care of and their families being taken care of and just all the different pieces are in play because I've been able to successfully negotiate all of that, now we're working with a much more stable situation and ultimately a more stable buyer and seller.
Yeah, I know that during the crazy markets that we saw here in 2021, 2022, there was very few of those deals that came down to the exact dollar figure that was the most important. It was usually how, as a listing agent, how am I going to help these clients get as much money possible, but also figure out how they're going to be able to maximize that money to buy their next house, right?
Yeah.
That took the knowledge and the skills to be able to navigate that, as well as when you're working with a buyer on that situation, like knowing that price wasn't the most important to those people. How can I put my client in the best situation by leveraging other items? Like, hey, do they need a 60-day closing? Do they need a 90-day closing? Do they need a rent back? Right. Do they want free rent for a month? Would that make things easier? Is there all sorts of different things that you can move around, like the chessboard, right?
Yes.
It's not just checkers. You can't just move forward, right?
Yeah.
Like you can move other pieces. So yeah, those unique ones or unique terms that we come across tend to be the more knowledge you have, the better they come across. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So one of the things, and this goes back as a starting point to client knowledge, starting with your client that you're sat down, and whether it was the listing the property or helping somebody buy, you did a thorough job in that intake, is identifying things that are important to them that may actually be free or of non-consequence to the other side. And so these things sometimes can be as simple as furniture. Right. Sometimes people, sometimes hot tubs, furniture, beds, all of these things, for some clients when they go to sell, they plan on fully replacing all those things. And the fact that they actually just have to move it is a complete nightmare in their eyes. And you may have a buyer who doesn't really even have the ability to afford to fully furnish their property. So over here you have somebody that knows they have something of value, but if they're being honest with themselves, it's a hassle, it's not a value. And over here you have somebody that needs that. So this group of people over here, they end up maybe getting a more robust price for the house, maybe $10,000, and they might leave $30,000 worth of furniture and equipment. And for them, it's a win. For your client, it's a win, right? Mm-hmm. So it's knowing all of those different little nuances about what are the different elements and value that are on the table, and then what are the different things that might be pressure points for your client. And you don't need to necessarily ask about furniture, but if you do a great job listening, which we're going to talk about in our next episode, you'll start to get a sense of what things are going to be problematic for your clients and what things are going to be kind of irrelevant.
It's really great when you can keep your client, their perspective correct, right? Because clients tend to get caught up in the transaction, especially during the negotiations of what's important to them. And you said something about like the win-win situation. Mm-hmm. I think it's such a great way of looking forward into a transaction and seeing how you can do best for your client, but also make the transaction work for them, which ultimately is best for them. And so when we talk about perspective in this transaction or in this process, how do you look at that?
Yeah, so when we talk about application, we apply our knowledge to negotiations, and then we apply our knowledge and access over here to perspective. And again, it's a little bit like access. It's really, really underrated how incredibly important perspective is. And for you as a real estate professional, if you can maintain a high-level perspective on the transaction and a high-level perspective on what your client said their actual needs and wants are, you're going to be a buffer for the transaction when it comes to them losing perspective. And there's a few things that we can do around this idea of perspective. One is that if you think about it this way, just zooming out for a second, a trusted guide always has perspective. Your clients, whether they are brand new to real estate or they have sold 5 or 6 or 10 homes, they haven't sold 2,000 or 3,000 homes, right? They may have climbed some mountains before, but they haven't climbed Everest. And so the fact that I can sit down with them and say, hey, as your trusted guide, I want to let you know that's actually not the peak of the mountain. What you think you see here is a false peak. And in fact, we have 5 or 6 more after that. Trust me, I will help you navigate that. That perspective, the perspective of I have been here and done that, applied correctly. And when I say applied correctly, is perspective as well as negotiations are always applied through this lens of my client knowledge. Right? Because if I'm trying to apply things that just don't matter to that person, I actually start breaking down the trust that I have with the client, because I'm trying to help them with things that they don't care about.
It makes me think of a lawsuit that I heard about in our area probably 7-8 years ago. And it was the agent didn't do a great job of keeping things in perspective on a home inspection.
Sure.
And they just went through, neither the agent or the buyer were at the home inspection, which I don't love, right? Like I would love one or the other to be there. And the buyer went through this home inspection report, which actually turned out to be one of the cleanest home inspections that we've ever seen. And he read the part about a pressure relief valve pipe. Mm-hmm. You know what that is? So the pressure relief valve pipe on your hot water tank, it was missing the pipe that runs to the ground.
Sure.
But in the boilerplate for the home inspection, it talks about like burning children, right? Like scolding children with their in their face, and so the agent didn't do a great job of keeping the buyer's perspective of like, hey, this is a Home Depot part for $10. You screw it in and you just cut it off 6 inches from the ground and it's fine. So they asked for it. They beat the sellers up on price already. And the seller said no. Buyers felt jilted because they didn't know what it was. Well, come to find out, like 6 months later, this buyer finds out that she lost out on this house because of this $10 part, and her client didn't know what it was, and she ultimately ended up suing. So when you're talking about keeping things in perspective for your client,
right,
and the knowledge that you should have, that's an application of that.
Yes. I had clients one time, and they wanted a newer house, but they fell in love with a house that was a little bit older. Right? The house was really, really well taken care of, and it really kind of had all the markers of a nicer, newer house that was going to be low maintenance. The issue is when the inspection came back, the foundation on one side was folding in and crumbling, and they started to lose their mind. Right? They were going to kill the deal and everything, but one of the things that we learned in negotiations was don't ever let the ball land in your court, kind of like you're playing tennis, right? Like you always volley it back, right? You always make it die in the other person's court. I said, hey, let's so we step back and say, okay, so with this house, it checks off all these boxes of a newer house with the exception of the foundation. And the foundation, if it was in good shape, would be 50 years old, right? What if the sellers were willing to replace the foundation? So now you have this great, beautiful house that really checks all these boxes. And one of the biggest points of failure for an older home that's expensive is actually brand new. Would that work for you? Right? So they go from being, like it's really pretty emotionally devastating because they fell in love with the house to that. We went and asked, and the seller said, yes. They didn't negotiate. They just said, yes, get the house jacked up. They had it engineered, had a whole plan together, dropped, I think at the time it was $35,000, probably more like $60 today. So the thing is that when you end up in those situations, you have to be able to apply the knowledge, again, the application is the situation through the client knowledge.
Yeah, so the way I listen to that story and what it makes me think of is that you removed their doubt, right? Like they probably had a great deal of doubt through that process of like, should we buy this with a crappy, foundation that's falling apart, or like, what if we don't buy this? Then we're back to looking again, and we hadn't found anything, and they had a lot of doubt in that situation. You stepped up, gave them a plan, got their buy-in on it, moved forward and used your skills and your knowledge to be able to negotiate for them.
Yeah, and one of the things just where perspective and negotiations start to come together is just know that you and I and every other person has a strong tendency to go binary. Right? And to create what's called a false dichotomy. And that is you have this choice or you have this choice. A lot of times, almost all the time, there are far more than two choices. We do this in business where we'll present somebody with two choices, but that's a good way to not make good decisions because there might be 5 choices. Right. And so when we are negotiating and people start to fixate on, do I kill the deal or do I go all in, or do I pay more or do I pay less? And those feel like the only options. If I can bring perspective, I can bring other alternative solutions to the table, which help us negotiate through to the end. And that perspective, like another way of thinking about perspective is context. So in communication, context is king. Most communication fails because two people don't share the same context. We walk into a conversation, I assume you know what I'm talking about, you assume I know what I'm talking about, and now we start communicating. And the reality is we have 2 different dictionaries. And so we start having this conversation and I started getting mad and you started getting frustrated because we cannot connect or come to terms on anything. And the reality is that as an agent, I haven't gone back, repainted the context, even checked the context to make sure what they said they wanted is still what they want, then to underwrite the perspective with that and then negotiate from there.
Yeah. It makes me think of what's that famous drawing where the 2 people are hanging off the ledge. One person's holding the other person and they've got a boulder on them, and the other person's hanging off the ledge, but they're being bit by a snake and they don't understand why the other person's not pulling themselves up, right? Like you haven't created the correct context and understanding. So when we want to understand our clients and what's important to them, the way that you do that is you do that through asking, right?
Yes. Yeah. So we take all of this, we talk about, we started all of this talking about being able to close for compensation and to be the trusted guide. And this actually comes back to the one thing that matters in everything that we do, and that is being able to ask. And we can say that really starts and ends with being ready, willing, and able to ask for business. Right? I'm not going to get the opportunity to close for compensation if I don't ask. That's what closing is it's fundamentally asking a question, right? I'm not going to be able to be your trusted guide if I don't ask you where the heck you want to go, right? And constantly throughout this whole time of working with somebody, I have to be able to ask questions that help us stay in clarity. So if I want to apply my specialty knowledge and I want to apply my access to all my resources extremely well, then I have to learn how to ask and ask again and ask some more and ask again and ask again. And in the process of closing or in the process of negotiations where asking shows up is I'm not always just asking for the business. I'm asking to make sure we are still moving forward together. Right. This is where things like trial closes become or should become very, very natural, because I'm not trial closing you all the time for a signature. But if we're having a consultation and I'm proving myself, I'm demonstrating that I'm the trusted guide, I need to stop for a second, turn around and say, hey, are you still climbing this mountain with me? Because if you took a hard left turn, I need to know about that. And I need to know about that before I'm too far up the mountain.
Yeah. The word that we used in one of our past episodes was alignment, right? Like, are we still in alignment in what's important to you, and that I'm driving this bus in the right direction, right?
Yeah. So if I apply my knowledge and I give you access to all of my resources, and then I take that in a skillful way, I help negotiate with you and for you, both of those two things, and I help you stay in perspective. All of that is framed up by me asking for business and asking for clarity at every step along the way. And if I do those things, now I'm going to be able to close for compensation. I'm going to be able to give that ask that causes somebody to say yes to paying me as a trusted guide.
The other ask in this, and I'll just throw this out there, is if you do a great job of being a trusted guide to your client, and you get them that amazing experience that we talked about with your trip you just went on, where you ranted and raved about how extraordinary it was than if you had just done it yourself.
Yeah.
If you deliver that to your clients, the end of the transaction, you ask them for a referral.
Yeah.
They're going to love to give you a referral.
Absolutely. Right. Do you want your friends to have the same kind of experience with their trusted guide that you did?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm that guy.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So hopefully you guys listened to all these episodes. This was probably one of my favorite series we've done in this, because I think that I wish that when I was a brand new agent that I had resources like this.
Sure.
So hopefully this has an impact on you, empowers you, and encourages you. And check out our next episode, which is all about listening. And the title for that is going to be Stop, Collaborate, and Listen. So we look forward to...
It's hard to not finish the rest of that. It's going to be good, guys.
Yeah, it's going to be good.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.